Thanks for joining us for another episode of DPC Radio. This episode was recorded live in Amsterdam at the Dutch PHP Conference 2012. For more information about the Dutch PHP Conference, visit our website, phpconference.nl.
Well, this talk is about Frisby.js. It's a REST API testing tool. How many of you have tested an API of any sort? Okay, so this is good. What kind of tools have you guys been using so far? Like Behat or PHP Unit? Yeah? No. Oh, there we go. And that's true, the joined-in API, actually. So who am I? My name is Vance Lucas. If you want to heckle me, I'm vlucas on Twitter. If you want to do so passive-aggressively on Twitter. VanceLucas.com is just my personal homepage. My business is Brightbit, and it's .it, so in the name. We just do design, development, consulting around web apps and mobile apps and APIs. So what is Frisby? You know the first part. I've already said it. It's built using node.js, and it's built on Jasmine. So it's kind of a DSL over Jasmine. So whenever you write your tests, what it's going to generate and run are Jasmine tests. Have any of you used Jasmine before for testing JavaScript? Cool. You want something? You can come up and get it, too, if you want. It's an NPM module. NPM is Node Package Manager. Composer was kind of modeled after NPM, so it's very similar if you've used Composer. API docs are Frisby.js.com, and the GitHub repo, that's my personal GitHub. It's on there if you want to check it out. The link to that is also on the website, so you just go to the website. So why make Frisby? Frisby was developed with a major client of ours that was doing a significant rewrite of the API, of their API, 2.0 to 3.0, but they were also changing a lot of stuff in 2.0 behind the scenes just to deal with the scaling issues that they had. And so they needed to make sure that nothing broke on their API because they were consuming their API from everything. And they have mobile apps, Windows Phone, Symbian, Android, iPhone, iPad, like everything you can imagine. They have a Kindle app. So their API is in all platforms, and not all of them are ones that they can update immediately if they update their API. So they just needed to maintain as much compatibility, backwards compatibility as possible through these changes. So we made Frisby, and then we went through and tested all of their API endpoints, ensuring that the object structures returned and the values and the types returned were all the same for any time that endpoint was hit, so that none of the apps would break. So I say BDD. It's a BDD REST API testing tool, and it's just behavior-driven development. And essentially what that is it's testing your user interface. This is kind of the long version of that. This is from Wikipedia. It's basically your API is mission critical to your business's success and your developers being able to use it. So you want to make sure that you're testing that. Whatever user interface you have is what the customer is going to see as broken. So BDD tests your user interface, and then the developer's user interface is the API. And so that's why Frisby is kind of by developers for developers to make sure your API is all in order. So really the question is, are you sure your API is working exactly as it's supposed to? And kind of entwined in that question is this question. So are the types the right types in JSON that they should be? A lot of times when you unload an object that you retrieve from a database, it may not be unloaded in the right JSON value that you want. Like Postgres uses T and F, like a string T and a string F for Boolean fields instead of Boolean true and false when you unload that. MySQL doesn't have Boolean, so you got to use tiny int, 1 or 0, and that's not a Boolean either. That's an integer, so obviously. And then floats, numbers, are they numbers, or are they actually coming out as strings? So you want to make sure that, the types that you have set are actually the right types coming out of your API, and Frisby will help you with that, as well as object structures and stuff. So this is kind of a short list of the things that Frisby will help you with. It ensures your API is working, for one, and it integrates with CI tools if you use them. The test runner exports a JUnit XML format, which can be plugged into pretty much any CI tool. So if you use something like Jenkins or Hudson or anything in any other environment, even other programming languages, it will still integrate fine. It checks return values. So if you have a specific test, you want to search for a specific search query and make sure something returns in that query, you can test, like, is this object somewhere in this array? Does it contain these values? And you can test that. It can check return types and object structures. So, like, is this a string? Is this a Boolean? Is this an integer or a number? Because JavaScript doesn't specify between integer and float and stuff. And then you can test your full stack. And this is probably one of the best hidden features about testing your actual API, is because you're also testing your caching layer. And so code tests don't touch your caching layer. And so when you get an issue like a cache invalidation bug, where you add an item, but that cache isn't getting invalidated, it's not coming through on the search, or it's not coming through on the listing, then you can actually test this with Frisby, because you're testing your API. So you can add an item, and then right after that's done, you can pull a list and see if the item's in there. It can act as basic API documentation for your developers. It's going to be JavaScript code, so it's not going to be like really good API documentation. But at least if you don't have other documentation, or if you can use it as maybe supplementary documentation to point to, like, hey, this is how all the fields required to create an item or something, and then they can use that. They can copy it and run it, and it's a lot easier to share and run. Well, maybe not easier to run, but a lot easier to share and copy and paste than like a curl, command, especially if you're dealing with a lot of post fields or something like that. So it can also help users report bugs with code, and I'll get into that here. So yeah, I kind of went over this, but the full stack testing is, it's just you're testing your caching layer, and that's the main thing. That's the most important thing. Because those cache invalidation bugs are so hard to find. They're hard to recreate. So if you can create a rerunnable test case in a couple lines of JavaScript or a single JavaScript file or something that you can rerun that and share that says, hey, I found a bug here in the API. Here's the code to reproduce it. That's awesome. So it also encourages you automatically, kind of by nature, to set up a proper test and development environment, because you don't really want to be running API tests against a production API, because you don't want to actually be creating real items. So this is probably one of the biggest things that might prevent people from, adopting, or smaller projects maybe from adopting Frisby, because they might not have a dedicated test or development environment set up, and that's kind of sometimes cumbersome and difficult to do. But highly recommended if you can set one up to have some kind of test endpoint that you test with. You can do it with your real API if you delete the items, and clean up after you're done. But yeah, it's, you guys know. It's a little tricky that way. So bug reports are a pretty interesting feature of Frisby, because a lot of times what will happen is a developer will be using your API, and then they'll run into some kind of issue, and you say, well, I need to be able to reproduce this issue, so I need code to reproduce this. And a lot of times it's not easy for them to share that code or show you exactly what they're doing. It may be a series of curl calls. It may be, they might not even know the curl code offhand, right? Because a lot of times they're doing it through PHP or through another programming language. So they're just calling a library helper that's making that call for them. So with Frisby being really simple, kind of concise syntax and written in JavaScript, it makes it a lot easier to just go ahead and write that Frisby test and then show you how the test is failing. And you've got all you need right there. And you've got the test that you can merge back in with your test to not regress on that issue. So for the demo I'm going to show you at the end of the slides, I've got all the code. It's open source, so I've got all the code in one run repository. If you have a closed source project, but you have an open API, all you have to do is just put your Frisby tests in a different repo that's open. If you want people to be able to play with your API or run them or something. If you have an open source project, it's not an issue because it's all open anyway. So the steps for this like helping users submit bug reports just has to be in a public API. The tests do, not the whole code base. Developers fork it, or they can run their tests or something. If you use auth, just provide some people provide like a test API key with a limited rate or something, or you can make them plug in their own test before they run it. Then if a developer finds an issue, then they can create a test, they can fork your repo, create a test, and submit a pull request. And then you can go check it out, and then you can run it, and you can say, hey, that's obviously a bug, that's, those values should never be negative, so, we need to make sure that integer is never negative or something. And then you can fix that, and then you can have the test in your test repo when you merge so that it's always there and you never regress. So it's kind of nice. Nice developer-friendly way to report bugs. So I'm going to go over the API really quick, and then I'm going to just show you the actual code and how to set up an actual Frisby project. So the syntax is pretty simple. It's basically going to start with a create, a get, post, put, delete, something method, and then a toss, and then whatever test you have in between. So this is just an example for listing objects. And there's some syntax in here I'll explain. Expect status, you're just expecting that to have a HTTP status. The expect JSON types, there's two main functions for testing JSON. There's expect JSON types and expect JSON. And I don't know, I guess I did say it. This is really only for JSON APIs because it's written in JavaScript, it parses JavaScript, it loads it as JavaScript, and tests it as JavaScript. So if you're using XML, you can probably do this, but you'll have to probably make your own expect helpers, which you can still do with the after keyword. You can put any callback you want, and I'll go over that too. But this really works best for JSON APIs because it's all JavaScript front to back. So both the expect JSON and expect JSON types helpers accept either one or two arguments. And those are, right here we have a path and then an object of things that we're expecting that JavaScript object to be. And the path is interesting. So what the asterisk is, there's two special path modifiers in Frisby. And this is expecting an array of items. So in this API response, we're expecting a key. We're expecting an object to have a key called items. And then that's going to contain an array of other objects that we're going to test. So the asterisk says you need to test for the presence of this key and the type of this object in each of the items that come back in the array. So think of the asterisk as like for each. So each item in that array is going to be that. If you want to test for a single item in an array, say, and this is really when you're testing values instead of types. Types are easy. You can just test everything. Every item should have all these types the same. But when you're looking for a specific value, that's just a question mark. So is this item in here somewhere? So you do items dot like question mark and then ID 42 or name test or something. And then you hit toss. And then toss just runs the actual HTTP request. You can do mocks too. In the create method or in the get method, If you do a second argument there, you can pass an options array, and if you just option mock and then your mock object, it can run so it doesn't do live HTTP requests. It can do that, and I'll show you that in the test. So there's kind of 3 sections of methods in Frisby for the API. There's helpers, which are these. They're basically anything you do to set up for a test before you submit the HTTP request itself. So you can do a global setup, which is like if you have if you're using OAuth or something and you need to set an API key or a header that's going to go in every request, you can just do a single global setup, and you don't have to do that for each test or create some helper wrapper to do that for you. There's setup, which is each test will have its own setup thing. Timeout, you can adjust long or short, whatever you want. The headers are easy. Auth does basic auth, digest auth, HTTP basic. So it's username, comma, password. It's just a helper. It just adds a header. You could do an add header and include a MD5, hashing NPM module and do the same thing, which is just more work. And then after JSON, let you run any JavaScript function you want or any other Frisby tests after that one is finished. And this is how you kind of nest test to make sure that one runs after other one is complete. Because Jasmine runs all these tests asynchronously, so you don't know the order. So you can't do like a single test, and then you can't do like create this item and then a separate test below it, like delete this item, because then your delete will fail because it just fires them both, and then it says, hey, I can't find the item to delete it, and you're like pulling your hair out, like what the heck? But it's node.js, and so you've got to nest that in a callback. And I'll show you all that too. These are all the expectation helpers. The expect max response time was added 2 days ago. Someone submitted a pull request. I love GitHub on this and just added that. I guess they were testing a service that was supposed to be really fast all the time, and they had like a maximum ceiling time that it could run at, and they wanted to know if it ever ran below that time, which is cool. So I merged it in. Expect JSON length is like how many items are in here. It tests objects and arrays and strings. So if you do, if you're doing like pagination, pagination should return 10 items, you can do expect JSON length and then just the path, like items or response.data.blog post, whatever you put, and then it'll make sure the number of items in there are that. Rest are kind of, expect body contains can take like a regex, a regular expression. So if you're doing something like you need to test text instead of JSON or XML or a web page, you can actually use expect body contains, and you can pass it a regex, and it can do testing for you on that. And then the inspector. So if something's going wrong in your Frisby test, and you need to see some information back about either the request that Frisby sent or the response that I got, the inspectors will help you with that. Inspect JSON parses the JSON response and then shows it to you like in pretty printed, so you can really see what that JSON looks like. Inspect body just dumps the body without any special parsing. So if your API is like returning invalid JSON or something, and you're not able to use inspect JSON, then you can use inspect body to figure out what that is. Or if you need to see the XML or HTML or whatever is coming back, you can do that. Inspect request and response are like big objects that are returned because they're the like Node.js internal requests. So it'll show you all the headers that are being sent with it, all the body, all like everything. Maybe too much detail, but that's what it is. And inspect status will just spit back out the status in case you just want to see that. So let's go to demo. First thing is really, everybody see that? Here, let me everybody can see that? Okay, cool. So the first thing is setting up a package.json. You see at the bottom of the screen is package.json. And it's just like Composer. When you start a new project, you've got to define a package.json, which tells NPM all of your dependencies and like the project name. So this is the recommended project structure. You can actually run Frisby tests without doing this. But if you're going to set up a whole project, like under a directory or something, I put mine usually under like tests API or spec API, whichever name you like, test or spec better. Then you create this package.json. You tell it, I have a dependency on Frisby, so I need that. And then that's really all you have to do. The name and the version are just your API tests version. You kind of have to set up a new repo to get this. So then you set that up, and then you can just run npm install after that, and it'll grab all those packages for you and install them. I'm not going to do it because I don't know how reliable the network is right now, and I've already installed it. So, and then the other thing you have to know is that to run the tests, use a tool called Jasmine node. And so since Frisby generates Jasmine tests, this is a Jasmine test runner written in node.js that runs all this. And so you'll have to, and this is all on the site. These instructions are all on the site too, so you don't have to feel like you have to memorize them right now. But you have to do, if I can type, you have to do npm install Jasmine node. And I recommend the G flag for Jasmine node because it'll install it globally, which means you can run the Jasmine node command from the command line on any project or any Frisby project you have. That's the only npm module that really has to be installed globally. So go ahead and run the test just to make sure. So this is kind of the reporting that you get back. And I'll show you these tests here in a minute, but just wanted to show you the reporting. It can take a directory or a single test file. Let me check on time here. Okay. Okay, so this is kind of what the tests look like. So in your JavaScript file, you're going to start by including Frisby first, and then you're going to, I set up a base URL that's just to shorten the get calls here that I have to make. So it's just JavaScript, so you can organize it however you want. You can use the require to the function here to include either other npm modules or individual files include them with like a relative path. And Adobe sucks, so let me turn that off. And then I'm just defining these as placeholders for fetched object, so I can do this. And actually, I don't need that. So I can just use that in other Frisby tests. So it's a global object available to all the Frisby tests below in the test anyway. And so you can see the test here you create. You give it a name. And that way, if there's a failure on that, you can get the name of the test run, and then it'll tell you what HTTP method and URL that it used, so you can see where that went wrong. You can also do I'll show you what the pretty printed JSON here looks like. So if you're failing, you can say, well, where am I failing, or what key am I looking for in the JSON structure, and you can just dump out the JSON, and it'll show you. This isn't terribly pretty printed here. I guess it's just not nested enough or something. But you can kind of see. This API response is what I made for my demo app in the next session I have over on mobile. So it includes a bunch of links, and it's a little more verbose than more APIs because of that. But that's the whole test suite. So so there's that. There's also, okay, so this after JSON function here basically takes a callback. So, and there's after JSON, and after JSON is really just a modification of after that automatically parses the JSON response and then feeds it back to you. So it's one step less that you have to do. So you feed it a function, and then the first argument, just one argument, is whatever JSON was returned. And then you can do whatever you want with that. So in here, what I'm doing is I'm getting the response. I'm assigning it to a variable here. And then I'm creating another test. I'm essentially creating an item, a new budget item, based off that URL. And then we expect, here's the types. If your object is at the root level, you don't have to include a path parameter. So the path is optional. So if you're testing at the root level, you just start with your object definition. If you need to test in a path, then you can just provide that first. So I create that item, and then I save the item, the budget item that I created. I created a little demo budget app. So it's like got a budget and then transactions, and it gives you a balance of your budgets and stuff. So let's see. So then right after we create it, we do another nested after JSON, and then we ensure that that item is somewhere in the list of items. So we use our expect JSON types items.star, and then on the types to make sure all of the returned objects have those keys, and that those keys are those types. And we can make one fail. I don't know. If you guys want. So we got 2 failures now. And this looks like a whole lot of text being printed. It doesn't look that big when it's a smaller font. So. But it's a full stack trace back to where you were. So expected number to be type string on key balance. So it tells you the full path to help you debug. Tells you, if you do an expect JSON, it'll tell you the value instead of the type. So it'll be like expected 42 to be 43 on key, item.0.blog or item.blogs.0 or whatever the key is. So you know exactly which item is failing and where, so you can go fix it. So we'll put that back. And then what this is doing here, this is just a one-liner because I've assigned this this object back as soon as I got it back. So I created the item, assigned the response, the whole object to a variable, and then I'm testing for the presence of that object I just got back in the list of items that I'm fetching, just to make sure that it's included in there. And this is where I said this full stack testing, or this cache testing, can be really, or cache invalidation testing can be really useful. So if you have something that's a little bit disconnected, like a search on a separate Solr box or something, and you want to see, your indexes maybe are supposed to update immediately after an item is inserted, or you want to see like what kind of lag time there is, something like this, something that's kind of hard to determine, will kind of let you know, either by failing because it won't find the item, or by succeeding, so you know the item is there. So right after you create it, a lot of you might do like a simple memcache setup, just making sure an item is actually gone. So you could do anything in the in the second toss. You could do a search for a certain keyword that you put in the item, or you could you can think of all the different ways to do that if you use taxonomies or categorize stuff in your search or whatever you do. And then we just delete the item when we're done. so we clean up and don't leave anything in the database. And that's what I'm doing here. So you can see that if you keep going for this, it can get kind of verbose in the way that like most Node.js stuff can do. You're kind of in callback hell, you know. You've got callbacks and callbacks and callbacks and callbacks, and it gets really, really tedious and boring looking at that. And I've only indented this 2 spaces because I didn't want it to go off the screen. So, but luckily this is just JavaScript, right? So we can do some things, maybe make some helpers to improve the situation a little bit. So what I've got here is not the file I was looking for. This is the budget. So okay. Okay. So what I've done here is instead of including Frisby at the top, I'm including a common file that I made, and it's just a relative path to any random file that you wanna do. And let me. Well, I guess I'll just do this. Okay, so is that too hard? Is that too small, like a vertical space? Anyway, I'll maybe close this window right now, and I'll reopen it. But so this is a common file. So the common file includes Frisby, and then we set up our app object. We configure it, set up our configuration. You know, you can do anything in this file, and then we define a helper called with budget. So to test transactions, to add a transaction, we need a budget item to do that. Because we can't just add a transaction. We could and specify a budget ID, but the way I've structured the URLs, it has to be budget/ID/transactions, and that's what you post to. So the item has to already exist. So I created this helper function called with budget. And by the way, the GitHub repo for all this is open if you want to go look at it after. Kind of steal from it, or copy it, or whatever, or just take some ideas from it if you want to implement them yourself. But so basically, what this with budget helper does is it takes a single function, a single argument that's a callback, and then it just goes through, creates a new budget item. In your API, you might just do this first. The only reason why I'm starting from the base URL here is because of a hypermedia talk, the way I structured it. But you create a new item, and then after that's done, here in the after JSON, I call the user callback that was passed in. I set the context, to this current item. Whoop, wrong hotkey there. I pass in the budget that I saved after creating the item, and then I pass in the done callback. And so what this does, I'll just open this in a new window here. So, I think it's transaction. Oh, wrong one. Spec. Okay. So what I've got here is this with budget that has a, that has the budget as the first parameter that it accepts, and the done callback as the second parameter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do whatever I want to with that budget item that I got. And then after I'm done with all my tests, then I will call the done callback, which just cleans up, deletes the budget item. So it just does cleanup. So that's a pattern that I've been using. Just create helpers that pass in whatever you needed, whatever object you needed, and then pass you a done callback that does cleanup on that item. And that way it's all kind of nice and decoupled. You don't have to worry about setting up that item every time you need to use it. You can just do that callback and it'll do it for you. So that's kind of what's going on there. Are there any questions so far? Yes?
You mentioned testing Hypermedia API and ending up with it really nested. Do you have tips for avoiding that or working with it?
Not really. I mean, if you go full hypermedia, the only thing the client should ever know is the root URL, and then you go from that. So, yeah, There's really no way to avoid that unless you make the test synchronous. It's kind of the nature of Node, though. So, yeah. Yeah, and if you made the test synchronous, it would take so much longer to run the whole suite because they're live HTTP calls. So.
Would use some libraries like Steph and AC?
Yeah, you could. The way that Frisby wraps the Json or the Jasmine tests, it puts them in their own suite, and then all the suites run asynchronously. So there is a way to run tests synchronously in Jasmine. But it would take, it's not very hard in Jasmine code. It would just take some more code added in Frisby to let you run a test synchronously. But the way it's set up right now, it doesn't. So, okay. Are there any more questions on that? Okay, I think my stopwatch keeps going off here, my phone. Let's see, and then I'm exporting them. So with require, has anybody done like require.js style or modular JavaScript development? Okay, so basically with node.js, you can, when you require something, you have to export the variables. So I'm just exporting Frisby and config and my helper so that it basically prevents all the variables that you set up in this file from going in the global scope. That's why I can just, set up a global variable to hold like the budget, and not worry about it because it never goes in the global scope. It's just contained in that file, so I don't have to worry about it. And let's see, wow, it looks a little bigger. So this is the transactions one that I'm using inside the callback. I showed you this. Okay, we've seen all that. And I set up a GitHub. Well, I think that's all the code then. Unless you guys want to see like how to. Does anybody want me to do write some kind of test or know how to do something in this, or have any more questions?
If you are testing against a certain JSON type, it is also possible to test for optional fields?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's something I actually didn't cover. So it may not quite answer your question, but I will show you something else related. You can test for optional field values. I don't think you can test for optional fields. If you do that, you can do it manually. And that is actually one thing that I want to show you. So say you, let's see what's a good, I'll just copy this test here. Okay, so let's just I don't know. So I'll do something like this, and then well, that was failing here. Let me put this back so it's not failing anymore. So the answer really is an after JSON. Since Frisby just wraps Jasmine, you can add your own expects helpers in here. And I'm actually really glad you asked this question. And this is why. You can do expect res dot my key and to be blah, And that's going to run that Jasmine expectation inside there. So you can make Frisby do kind of the tedious work by requesting something and getting it back and parsing it into JSON, and then you can do whatever you want with it after. So let me show you. Jasmine matchers are what you want. So you can do, let's see, can everybody see those? So you can do any Jasmine matcher inside an after callback that you want, because it just runs Jasmine. So it's pretty flexible if you want to get really custom. And for checking if a key exists, you might do something like, I think there actually is a to be undefined or to be defined. You can do, expect my my key, and then to be defined, like that. So I can go ahead and run that. What am I in budgets? So my custom callback test failed because that was not defined. And then we can, I don't know, what is defined? Links, I guess. Well, you get the point, right? Nope. So now it passes. All right. Well, I'm out of time, but you can also. Well, let me show you one more thing. I've got to show this before we go. One other thing you can do that's customization is you can do a function callback inside here, and Frisby will execute it. And then you can do an expectation helper in here, or you can return true or false. If you return a Boolean, true or false, then true, the test will pass, false, the test will fail. So you can do your own comparison in here, or you can do a Jasmine expect helper. And some that are built in Frisby is this here. So a lot of times, if a field doesn't have a value, you'll make it null. And so I added I added my own matcher. It's built in Frisby. So if you include Frisby, you'll have these. You can do expect value to be type or null, and that's how you use this right here. And there's also another one like to be value or null, or to be null. I forget what it's named, but there's another one in there that you can expect it to be a certain value or null. So those help too. Okay, that's all I've got. Are there any more questions? Okay, well, thank you. And I don't want to take those boxes home, so I'm going to get one.
DPC Radio is a production of iBuildings. The materials presented are copyright of the speakers. This episode is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 2.0 license. iBuildings is a full-service web development company specializing in PHP development. For more information on how we can help you with your next web project, visit our site at ibuildings.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us again for DPC Radio.